So I wanted to touch on this topic real quick before we move on here, since we're talking about inheritance and composition. I think it's really important, especially in Java, to mention that you should be favoring composition. Basically, almost all inheritance can be rewritten as composition. We can find a way to make something that is inheritance composition. And I'm going to show you some ways to do this. It might not seem like this is true, but let's go through this and maybe you'll see what I'm talking about here. So one of the problems with object-oriented programming, it's kind of changed. The idea behind it has changed. Back when it was first used, a lot of inheritance was used. Now it's more composition because object-oriented programming was originally about modeling the real world, and we found that that doesn't quite work out all the time. It's still good, it still helps us, but really what object-oriented programming today is about modeling interactions in a system and roles and responsibilities. And however you can do that, what makes sense inside of that system, that domain that you're creating, it really is how you should model your classes, not exactly after physical objects and what exists in the real world. And with that knowledge, you can divorce yourself from the idea that the is-a relationship has to be implemented in terms of inheritance. And this is kind of opposite of what I had talked about before when I said, well, is-a is inheritance. There's a way to rewrite is-a so that we can actually make it a composition. We can make it a has-a. And one way to think about that is we can take an is-a relationship and we can say that same relationship has a implementation of something. So for example, if we took our example of an animal and a cat, well, a cat is an animal. We could rewrite that and say a cat has an implementation of animal. So we're going to put an animal implementation inside of cat so that cat can use all of the methods and all of the functionality that's inside animal, but it doesn't have to be one. And this distinction is really important for one main reason, which is inheritance is really difficult to maintain. A lot of the messy code that we've inherited over the years is because of inheritance itself being used in that code base. I know that I've personally worked in a lot of code where inheritance was overused, and it makes things really difficult because when you make changes to a base class, especially if you have a large inheritance tree, those changes ripple down and they cause breakage in all these subclasses. The same doesn't happen so much with composition. With composition, you kind of know what you're in for. So that's just some basic advice to try and favor composition. And I'm going to show you some ways that we can do that using what we're going to discuss next, which is an interface.